Welcome, folks. Come on in. Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome. I see some familiar names and some new names. Welcome, everybody. Folks that are coming in, if you want to drop your name and where you're from, or I guess where you're from, because your name is already there. Just let us know where you're from, so everyone can kind of see who's here, if you are so disposed. Welcome. We'll give it a couple minutes, let folks find their links. Very nice. I see, hello in Pittsburgh, Maine. Oh, I love Maine. Hi, Philly Food Rescue. Florida, Vancouver. So many wonderful places. I hope everyone is enjoying some nice weather. After, at least on the East Coast, last week we had some terrible weather, obviously the hurricanes, which hit some places really hard and just gave the rest of us terrible weather. Welcome. See, Sean, the earlier folks get here, the more they're subjected to my awkward attempts at banter and to fill the space.
That's okay. I used to host an open mic out of college. And sometimes it took people a little longer to get set up than we would hope. So I did a lot of that. Sometimes I just stood there several minutes, which they loved.
Ooh, Tammy from Idaho. I love Idaho. I was there last year for the first time, and it is gorgeous. My favorite thing about Idaho is that if you go to Boise, there's I forget what it's called. It's a peregrine falcon research center or something like that, but they have a harpy eagle, which is a unbelievably spectacular bird. The conference recording, do you mean this will be made public, this will be sent out next, probably next week. Yeah, that will be recorded and sent out after this week. All right, we'll give folks another minute or two. I'm always one of those folks that are searching around for my webinar link at the last minute in a panic. Okay. Hi to the new folks coming in. If you are so disposed, we'd love to know where you're at. Just drop it into the chat so folks can see. And then we'll go ahead and get started here. So Sean, thank you for joining us. For those of you who don't know, Sean Hudson is our Director of Data Analytics at Food Rescue Hero. We're super excited to have him because we're all a bunch of giant nerds. We love data and we love using data to do what we do better. That's something that even before Sean joined our staff, our Pittsburgh org, which is the mothership of Food Rescue Hero, 412 Food Rescue was always trying to figure out how we could parse our data to do better. Sean has taken us to just new and exciting places with that sort of analysis. So we're going to take a look today with Sean at some ways that you can look at data and what we've kind of looked at in our data and how it's helped us think about what is the most strategic way to create efficient food rescue operations. Next slide. Just some housekeeping before we start. Put your questions as you go into the Q&A. We will address those at the end of the webinar, but make sure don't put them in the chat because sometimes that scrolls by really fast and we miss it. If you put it in the Q&A, we will see it. This is being recorded as someone asked when it will be sent out. It will be sent out probably next week, early next week. It takes a day for it to become available and then for us to get her act together and send it out to folks. But you will get the recording shortly after the webinar is over in the next couple of days. And at the end of the webinar, we will provide you with some links to request a follow-up meeting with Food Rescue Hero and to register for the next webinar. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Sean, to walk us through your slides.
It would probably help if I unmuted. Yeah, so as Jen already said, I am Sean Hudson. I'm the Director of Data Analytics at Food Rescue Hero and 412 Food Rescue. I've been here for a couple of years now. Gonna hit my third year probably during the conference. If people are so inclined to go, you absolutely should. Yeah, so I do the data stuff here. That's me. Before we get into anything, I'd like to kind of get into a story within our operations that happened very recently. So we were born out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, founded in 2015. After a number of years, we got an app. We did that, and obviously, we licensed that to a number of partners now. We're in 20 cities, something like that. We're all over the place, kind of always sliding someone on. But yeah, we 412 Food Rescue continues to be probably the biggest, the biggest user of our app, obviously, being the parent company and all, but they're still, for its size, a very large food rescue operation. This year, what we noticed kind of an odd pattern. So what we're looking at here are our total rescues completed by month this year. So, every month we saw a small increase in rescues, kind of to be expected. These are our recurring rescues, so they happen every single week. And then from May to June, we saw like around a 10% drop, which was a little bit alarming. People noticed immediately, and that brought up a lot of questions, right? The main questions being like, what can cause this? Were there a lot of cancellations in our rescues, right? So, did the volunteer or the donor reach out to us and say that there wasn't going to be a donation? Or, did we sever ties with a lot of places? Was this just normal seasonality, right? Between May and June, that's when a lot of schools are getting out for the summer. What we typically see when that happens is a small uptick in donations. So, schools kind of offloading, the schools that we have relationships with, offloading the food that they have, and then just kind of shuttering after that. So, we use those rescues until August or September, depending on when they open. Or, was it the problems with the data itself? We obviously have a pretty robust system that we use that uses a database, and, obviously in the process of migrating things over, entering data, there are places where things can fall through the cracks, right? So, is it just the data that's wrong? So let's think about seasonality. In the gray, you see 2023 over the same months. In orange, 2024, so this year. This was pulled last week. So obviously, those August numbers are going to be a little higher now, but they're not really what's important. What we care about here is January through July. And what we see in June is we're actually higher. We've moved more food from last June. And importantly, we did not really see a dip from May to June. So the seasonality argument doesn't seem to hold, right? That drop is significant. Go ahead, Jen. You're about
Yeah,
to
I
say
just
something.
want to point out, yeah, because what's really interesting about this is that it shows how you have to look at data. You can't look at data in a vacuum, right? You have to look at it in context. And so, we are up from last year. So if we just looked at, this June compared to last June, and we rescued more, we might think, oh, cool, okay, we're good, right? Or if we looked at the year and see it's down, we might think, oh, well, it's probably seasonal. If we look at everything factored together, though, we can get a better picture and know we are actually seeing, an anomaly, something that's out of pattern and needs to be looked at.
Yeah. So even and if you look at May, right, that's pretty interesting. You see that there was a big jump from last May to this May. There's kind of a big jump every month, right? So we could drill down into the statistics of it if we really wanted to, but we do see a general trend of kind of a lot more rescues, right? Those are we've got a lot of operationsy people who come to these, so do put what you think it is in the chat, absolutely, because it took me a weirdly long time to figure it out, right? So this is really important. These are recurring rescues, right? So those are rescues that generally occur weekly. We develop those through partnerships. So, we will talk to different retailers. Retailers are the big one for us. So we will reach out to them, an individual location, and they will set up a recurring donation every single week. And then usually it's the same volunteer, it doesn't have to be, but that is planned. And then that rescue is planned to occur. Volunteer will go pick it up and take it to almost always the same place every week. And those, importantly, and this is probably true for most of you, are not distributed evenly across the week, right? Saturday and Sunday are low for us. I know in our network, that's generally true, but some have more than others, but Saturday and Sunday tend to be low days. And for whatever reason, Mondays and Fridays can be pretty big. Otherwise, though, the vast majority of our rescues do occur kind of within the standard work week. So that's Monday through Friday. Those weekdays, however, are not evenly distributed across every month. So in May, we actually had 5 Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays, which means those recurring rescues that happen every week across all of them happened a lot, right? We had 5 of them. So we had, 20, what is that, 80% of the working week was longer. So we had about 80% of an extra week in there. Super important, right? So that accounted, it turned out, we verified this. The data was fine. We had one of our dispatchers really bite the bullet on that one and go in and verify that these rescues occurred when they expected. And it was that. It was very much that it was having 4 Tuesday through Fridays made it accounted for hundreds of rescues because we're a high volume organization. So it's not a huge surprise that it matters, right? So 90% of our rescues recur weekly. That is not, like a donor doesn't call us for most of them. We already have those existing relationships and they happen every single week. And rates of cancellation were about the same. I didn't get into it in here because it would turn into a long set of slides, but we also looked into like the weight per rescue, things like that. If the weight per rescue goes up and the rescues go down, then that's fine. That would probably just mean that there was some other issue that caused less instances, but they're dumping the same amount of it, so it doesn't really matter. They were comparable, so there just was fewer instances of donations because there were fewer days to which they donate. And data integrity was good. We did a pretty thorough check just to make sure that it wasn't that, right? Um, yeah, so that's the big thing, right? Right. And to get the data itself can't be the answer, right? Because we had all the data in front of us, and we kind of felt victim to that, right? If we slice and dice it in a million different ways, can we find it? The answer is probably, but what we should go into it with is a hypothesis and then test those hypotheses, right? What could impact operations, and then look at the data in the ways that you would, and see if what you would expect to happen because of that. But yeah, so weekly rescues. That's kind of what we talked about here, right? That was the reason for the drop. We were kind of victims of our own success in that case. We saw a big drop because so many rescues happen every single week. We probably see that with ad hocs too, right? Because the stores are working the same hours. Um, as I mentioned, our recurring, often call them weekly rescues, make up, in the neighborhood of 90% of our rescues. In 2023, it was around 85, 87. So only up to 15% of our rescues are set up by dispatch each day. And that's instances of a donor, so, a caterer, a retailer calling us saying they have this available food. Dispatcher will go and try to find a nonprofit who can accept it, and then we'll post it to the app in our case, or in a lot of operations case, they'll start calling volunteers, right? That's a lot of work. So you can only do so many of those in a day, and we're able to get the type of volume that we get through the maintenance of relationships instead of just kind of transactional every single time trying to do something. We have these existing relationships that we just check in on. And what we have found is that recurring rescues are the most effective way to increase that capacity, right? Volunteers don't need to be contacted or recruited each time. If you have a volunteer who does it every single week, then they do it every single week. If you're in an app, then it's kind of nice. They just, they have it on their app, they get notified, they do this every week. Donors and nonprofits don't need to be contacted each time because these are expected donations, and all we really need to connect with them on is if something isn't going as planned. The chart here is just the volume of weight by date, so that's a month over month, last year as well. And as you can see, like, big majority of it, there's definitely seasonality in there, but most months the majority of our weight also comes from recurring rescues. We also do home delivery. Really no reason to cut it out. It's a smaller percentage, and we treat them kind of like ad hocs. So we did do a lot of analysis on this. Recurring rescues make volume possible. This real quick. There we go. So placing a rescue can take upwards of an hour. I've shadowed dispatch. I've spoken to them, and there's time associated with, one, getting the information about the donation, and then also finding someone to take it, right? So what'll happen is we'll hear about a donation, we'll try to find places that can take the food, and there's a timeliness element to this, right? This needs to be placed at a time that a volunteer will be willing to claim it and willing to do it. So time is of the essence. This food is perishable. You might not be able to do it the next day or the day after that. So there's a ceiling when we place each rescue, and that is the limitation becomes manpower. So maybe you have two dispatchers if you're a fairly large dispatch operation, and they can maybe place 5 to 10 a day. At most, you're kind of looking at 20 is a pretty good day if you're taking calls and placing them each time.
Can I interrupt you for 1 second,
Yes.
Sean? Just for clarity, just in case it needs to be repeated for us, what a dispatcher is the person who is sort of receiving calls about incoming food, finding homes for it, and finding volunteers. So in our operations and most of our partners, the dispatcher is that central point of sort of logistics for all of the donated food.
And they have a lot in their heads. And just talking to them is bewildering to me. The amount of information that our team can recall offhand is wild. These are super fast, effective people. But no matter how fast and effective people are, you're going to, like, if you need to place food quickly because you're getting more calls because this food needs to be moved, you're going to rely on what's known as like heuristics. So a simple set of rules that you know that this organization will pick up the phone and they will probably take this because you've worked with them before, right? Um, the the onus goes to the dispatcher to make sure that this food goes somewhere other than landfill. And ultimately can have a negative impact on the equity of like the equitability of the food that we distribute, right? If a place isn't great about picking up the phone, or a dispatcher simply just doesn't know this place very well or have a long-term relationship with them, they might not think of this place to place the food. So we have a whole team that does relationship management, but you don't necessarily need that if, as long as someone is reaching out to these places and setting up these rescues, you can set up a recurring rescue. And then the time that you spend talking to them can have more to do with how those rescues are going, right? You don't have to spend as long placing every single item, making new rescues. They generally donate the same, roughly, type of thing, and it always goes to the same place. And more often than not, the same person takes it. Um, though it doesn't necessarily have to, depending on how you put rescues out there. The only new information you would need is volunteer, right? You just, if even if you aren't sending notifications to people, if the only outreach you need to do is to volunteers, then that's a lot. It's half of the outreach. Um, Maybe more than that. There's a lot of volunteers, and Haley's very busy. So yeah.
And that
So you don't
really
want to rely on. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
And that really is the key to growth for food recovery organizations. There's so much food out there, but in order to get it, it takes that phone call to them, that relationship building. It takes your team person hours, right? But if your person hours are spent managing the donations that you already have, your ability to grow, not only because you may not have room or time to add more donations to manage, but you don't have time to go out and talk to those people to make those relationships. And so if you can limit the amount of time you're spending every day managing those rescues, it gives you the capacity to grow without adding more staff. And that's so key in a nonprofit.
And I did talk about how, we did analysis and we determined that it's important to have a high percentage of recurring rescues to increase your capacity, right? I should probably explain what this highly unintuitive graph is. So what this is the each instance of a day of rescues for every organization in our network. It is the percent of those that are recurring and the total number of rescues they're able to complete per day. And there's you know, not at every level is that relationship obvious and huge, but there's a very clear, ceiling, and pretty notable trend, right? Like in a given day, it is just easier to do more rescues. So where a point is very dark, that just means there's more observations at that intersection. And I would say that if you're not doing 50% rescues, it's gonna be hard to do more than 30 rescues a day, right? Like some people do, but you don't see it very often. And that is just and that's within our network and people who are using an app. So that's even more to the point, right? If you're working like a lot of organizations are early on, out of spreadsheets, out of Facebook Messenger, they get a ton done, but there is a lot of outreach that needs done and a lot of things that you need to do. So these relationships make a huge difference. And then we see that that's even more true at the weekly level, right? So this is aggregated to a week, and it is totally routine for organizations that we work with to be doing, 600, 700 rescues a week. And that's, not unusual with a lot of the people that we work with. And most of our partners doing ad hoc rescues are doing, the average is about 5 a day. And because they're high effort, even with technology, there's a lot of work associated with them. 75% of them are doing 7 or fewer, but they still move a lot of food every single day, every single week, because they have these relationships with their donors and their nonprofits where they're able to do them every week and have very low touch work associated with them, right? And they, as a result, on average, the people that we work with are doing, close to 40 rescues a day, which is a lot, right? So efficiency, we talked about how the capacity of the organization becomes so much more when you do things like weekly rescues. But uh, efficiency doesn't exist in a vacuum, and it means different things to different people, right? So you need to think about what efficiency means. In this case, it was the amount of food that we're able to move in a single day. Those numbers are great, they're very helpful, but there's other things to think about. So there's total food, number of people served, that is complicated, especially with the number of nonprofits that all of us work with. But it's something to think about. And think about how technology, volunteer engagement, and partnerships can be leveraged to enhance these outcomes. So in the case of recurring rescues, you have a partnership with your donors and your nonprofits, and you're able to basically not touch this rescue anymore. Yeah, set clear goals and benchmarks. So do you want to reduce the time? Do you want to have more food per rescue? Do you want to decrease your overall mileage? Those are all things that are very helpful. We are starting to implement some rescues that we call that have multiple stops on either end of them. That will probably increase the average length of a rescue, but if you were to tally up all the miles driven in a day, it will probably be a lot less, right? When we think about things like carbon impact, that ends up being kind of important. Even if technically a volunteer claimed several rescues, and isn't, came up with an efficient path, we can say that they are probably doing this in an efficient way, but now we don't have good information on that, right? We don't know how far they actually drove. But now that we're kind of dipping our toes into doing these, we're really excited to kind of see how that impacts our overall like carbon footprint, for example. Yeah,
And
increasing the
Sean,
number of six.
you did
Sorry.
something really, I just wanna basically brag on you because I love this so much. You did something really neat and you calculated the sort of break even point for food, for driving food around.
Yeah, I wish I had it in front of me. It is um, shorter than you think. You can go surprisingly far. I think that what we found out was the average is so doubling the distance of the rescue, right? Because you got to go back home. It ended up being in the neighborhood of it was over 100 miles a rescue could be for the average rescue in our network before you hit zero. So generally, up until that point, depending on the type of food, you would see a net gain, right? So you would be mitigating more carbon, greenhouse gases, not really carbon. In the case of like meat and produce or meat and dairy, it's methane, which even more important to mitigate. Um, you It takes a lot
Like you said,
of distance. Yeah, it was over 100. I'd be happy to include that in the link that we send out because we actually did calculate a pretty exact number, and it's high. So you would be surprised how far a rescue can be. And usually the limitation is how far people are willing to drive a rescue. Um, it was to the point where it almost didn't matter. Like if you want precise numbers, you should think about that. But if what you're worried about is, will driving this food have a negative impact, greenhouse gas wise, almost certainly not. And yeah, that's a metric that we kind of care about. We're working on. We have a pretty unique way of calculating our greenhouse gas emission impact. You should absolutely navigate to Refed. We have them on webinars. We talk to them all the time. They are excellent and the best in class. And those are the numbers that we use. So it's very cool and a lot of fun to work with them. What
yeah, and so
else?
one of the things about that too is that if you have this data, you can make decisions, right, about what your priorities are. So we want to make sure that we're not driving our food, our donations so far that we're mitigating the impact. But sometimes maybe we have really like a lot of really fresh food that is really concentrated that we want to get out wider. How far is it till we overpass that break even mark? And maybe we don't care in that one instance because we know that it's going to have an impact on hunger. And in general, we are doing really well. So just having all of that information allows you to make really smart and calculated decisions.
Yeah, and that's another kind of goes back to that first one, right? Like you need to figure out what is important to you and your organization. What is it that you were trying to impact, and then either design metrics around it or use that number. Sometimes it depends a little bit, right? Contextualize in the story that you want to tell. So we are on the logistics team. We really care about food per mile. We have a fleet, and that is super important, right? Because we don't, not just for emissions reasons, right? For efficiency reasons, right? We care about how much fuel we're using, how many miles we're putting on our fleet, and those are things that we need to think about. So if you can move more food per mile, then a bigger load is not so bad. Or going a little farther is not so bad if you're moving a fair amount of food, and that matters to them. It's a metric that they look at. It is far from the only thing that is important to them. They also care about no one getting injured dropping food off, which they're doing great at. Yeah, and I already kind of talked a little bit about one volunteer doing multiple pickups or drop-offs, but that moves more food with less emissions usually. What you might weigh against that is the volunteer satisfaction with the rescue, right? It could be very easy to set up a really undesirable route. The good news is, we give a lot of transparency into what a route is going to look like. But just setting things up means like setting things up in a suboptimal way is going to lead to people not claiming the rescue, and then maybe your fleet has to do it or it doesn't get placed, right? These are all things that we want to think about. Yeah.
Great. So we'll get to the information about the next webinar first. We've got some questions that have been asked. There's one in the chat I'm gonna start with before I miss it. Justin wants to know if there are cases where the nonprofit or donor could rescue the food themselves if they were aware of local food surplus potential donations, and I'll get to that. Certainly that is the case, and many nonprofits, many food recovery organizations do rely, at least in part, on the recipient organization picking up the food. Again, I think what you want to look at here is if you take all of the incidents that are happening, all of your data. Sean, you look like you want to jump in. And
Oh no, I was just looking at some of the questions. Just
if
looking at
you,
like if anyone was curious, the most food is probably rescued by our LA partners. Their volume is crazy.
yeah, but we do have nonprofits that pick up the food, but for a lot of nonprofits, they don't have the capacity to do that. And it really puts a strain on their resources. Whereas we have so many volunteers that want to be doing rescues, right? That's they're volunteering. That's what they do. That's sort of what the model at 412 Food Rescue and Food Rescue Hero is based on. It's based on volunteers doing those rescues. There are certainly organizations that do rely on the recipient organizations to do the pickups. It's a different model. There's different benefits. If you're relying on a volunteer-based model, like Sean is saying, that repetitive, recurring rescue is what increases your capacity. And actually, I want to jump into what somebody else asked, which is the saying that, oh, it is Justin. I'm assuming that there are substantial more spontaneous donations that could be made. I know in Pittsburgh, we don't turn down donations. If somebody has to be picked up that day, as long as it's, wholesome food and, somebody wants it, then we will pick it up. So we are able to fully realize all of the donations that are made. Where we gain the ability to grow is that we can go out and we can make relationships with more donors so that we can get more regular volunteer or donations, we can get more spontaneous if we're making those relationships. It just expands our capacity and gives us time to do other things. We can spend more time placing those one-off donations if we have mostly regular rescues that we don't have to spend a lot of time with. What you can do with that time gained by your staff is, the possibilities are endless. You can really focus your efforts in that extra time you gain where you want to grow, where you want to put them.
I think that was an answer. Jean asked a question: if we calculate the miles per gallon of the vehicle that travels for the rescue, we don't have super up-to-date data on people's vehicles. We get like a type when people register. Sometimes they register with multiple types. We don't collect their make and model and stuff like that. So when we do communicate our greenhouse gas emissions like impact, we generally use an average and then calculate our miles, apply that average to the miles, and then subtract that from the total that we have within our system. So that's our best practice kind of for communicating them externally. There are plans. We do want to kind of calculate within the app, which we're working on, but there are some considerations to do still. And at the moment, especially with people in Canada versus here, across different states with different vehicle types, it's usually we kind of give guidance on how to do that, like the best way to do that, and then let people use their own best judgment.
I was just
Yeah,
typing out an answer
absolutely.
to
What else we
Justin's
got?
question, which is asking if our main bottleneck is not having more nonprofit partners. I don't, that has been historically at moments a bottleneck. And I think a lot of organizations face that, especially when they first start really ramping up their rescues, because the automatic, I think, assumption is that you're going to distribute this food to pantries or to shelters. And there's not enough pantries or shelters to absorb the amount of fresh food when you really increase the amount of food that you're rescuing. And so that's an early bottleneck where we end up, how we end up solving that is by looking to non-traditional organizations like housing authorities or medical clinics. But because we're focused on, and this gets to the matching algorithm question as well, because we're focused on food waste as much as hunger, it's really important that the organization that the food goes to has opted in. Right. We make it very clear with our nonprofit partners that if we call them with a donation, they can say no, and we're still going to call them the next time because we don't want to turn surplus from a grocery store into garbage at a nonprofit. So there can be times when, in the summer, for example, there have been moments where there's just a lot of fresh tomatoes, and you call around and you'll get, oh no, we don't need any tomatoes. Like we have all the tomatoes we need, or corn or cucumbers or whatever it is that's in season. And so it takes a lot of time to find where that extra surplus, that surplus can go. And that's where we want to invest our time, is making sure that we're finding a home for that food, that it can be used. We do have some standing arrangements. That's what those regular rescues are, where a nonprofit says, yeah, we can handle the amount of food that comes out of that grocery store every Wednesday. No problem. We agree to take that, in perpetuity. However, if that grocery store one day yields an insane amount of leftovers because somebody, or surplus because somebody over ordered, they will call us and we'll rehome that. And that's where dispatchers really spend their time, is on those edge cases. And you want to create a system that is automated enough that you can put time into those edge cases to make sure that you're hitting your goals across the board.
Yeah. I see Ricky's question in here. Oh, two questions. I'll answer the first one because I haven't gotten to it yet. For optimizing routes manually, that is a great question. It is hard. There exists a lot of different like softwares for it, but that'll try for you. So you put in like a CSV of where it's coming from, where it's going, and set up some rules. It will try. Alternatively, if all you have is the people on hand, I recommend getting the coordinates, right? You can geocode them. There's a lot of free geocoding tools out there. Just be careful about their data sharing agreements. But you can geocode addresses and use those in like Google Maps to kind of visually see where those places are. The nice thing is, with donors, right, we know where the donor is because they are donating food and they're the ones who have the supply. So really the tricky part is figuring out where it's going to go. So there's a lot of considerations in there, but Google Maps has been a pretty good tool that our team used for a long time. We recently added some mapping features, and our technology will kind of try to give you the best possible route based on the pickups and drop-offs, but it is hard. There's a lot of considerations in that one. Local network building. What else we got? There are a
Did
couple
you
in
answer
here.
the question about the route audit and algorithm?
Yes, yeah, that's the one I was talking about.
So Food Rescue Hero technology and or other apps help for local network building. Yeah, there's a lot of work being done right now to help organizations that are doing food rescue build their network. Food Rescue Hero, we help support our partners both in learning best practices and getting connected to national networks. And I know that there are other national organizations out there. Oh, Katie's gonna kill me. I'm totally blanking. Katie, if you were on this call, you could tell me. Hold on. Replate. There we go. Replate works with donors and they help connect organizations to, they help connect donors to nonprofit organizations that are doing food recovery in their area. So that's somebody you could reach out to. Food Donation Connection does that at a national
That's
level as
very
well.
good.
Yeah, so there's a lot of organizations that are helping to do that. And somebody asked about the Food Rescue Hero Conference. I will pitch that, and I will drop the link to register into the chat. Actually, Diane, if you can do that while I talk, because I can't do the same thing. I can't do two things at once, or I'll hang up on everybody. The Food Rescue Hero Conference will be talking a lot about that. I know that food donors is a big issue for a lot of nonprofits, and so that's something we always hit hard during the conference. It's open to everybody. It's non-denominational. We'll be giving out, we'll be working with industry leaders to talk about really actionable practices and information that your food recovery organization can put into practice. So I do encourage you to come to that, as well as to look at some of our past webinars.
Yeah, Food Rescue, Food Donation Connection is great. They are like a starter pack for food rescue operations. You should, if you are trying to expand or start a food rescue, you should absolutely see if they have a chapter or anything around you, because they will do a lot of the legwork of setting up donors for you.
Yep.
Because they want to move that food. So yeah,
And
they're very good.
Annie asked, what advice would you give somebody looking for a career pivot to the food rescue and security space? If you do want to start a food recovery organization, we do have sort of a how-to startup guide on our website, as well as I think we've done 1 or 2 webinars on that. But I would say get involved. Coming to this webinar is a great start. Look and see if there's any food recovery organizations in your area that you can volunteer with. Get involved with Replate. There's lots of work being done in this space, and so I would jump in and start getting involved, because there will be certainly opportunities.
Yeah, you will be, well, you might, if you're looking to do it, you might not be that surprised by the number of nonprofits that are involved in it. There's tons, and at least we, have worked in a lot of them. But I know that we have absolutely hired from our volunteer pool. So do those. That makes a huge difference. I think one of the questions that we always ask people is like if they've done a food rescue. It's not a yes no, like this guarantees it, but like it doesn't hurt to have some familiarity.
Diane, who is dropping links in right now, was one of our early volunteers in Pittsburgh. In fact, she downloaded our first app and registered for it 10 days after I did. And I think I was the first person to download and register for the app that wasn't on the tech team. So, definitely get involved, and that will help open doors. Hassan, I'm going to answer your question in 1 second. I do want to plug next month's webinar. Sean, if you want to just hop ahead one slide. Slides, yeah. So we are going to talk about strategic food distribution growth. It's a practical guide to expanding your nonprofit partner network, your distribution network. How do you find organizations that aren't pantries that are willing to be part of your distribution network? How do you train them and get them ready to safely handle food? And how do you strategically fill gaps where you maybe are struggling to find places to donate food? So that'll be next month with it'll be myself and then Leland Scales, who has been with the 412 Food Rescue since almost the beginning. So he's got a lot of deep roots in the community and experience with this. Hassan asks, how do you, he's trying to look into how to tell if a rescue is worth it from the standpoint of distance traveled by the driver and the amount of food being rescued. And we did speak to this a little bit. Sean, if you just want to again hit on that.
Yeah, definitely. It kind of depends. So, what is it that we care the most about? That could absolutely be, if you're talking about emissions, it's almost always worth it. You are probably not gonna over emit if unless like you're rescuing 3 heads of lettuce, you're probably not going to emit more greenhouse gas than you're diverting by avoiding the landfill. Produce does have the lowest kind of bang for buck on that one. Obviously, like meats and dairies are huge because of their methane footprint, but it kind of depends, right? So when you're talking about being worth it, is it does the driver want to do this and will they be disappointed by it? So I would say, generally speaking, if someone is going to eat the food who would not otherwise get it, it's probably worth it, right? And generally speaking, most rescues are decent size. Like I think our network average for non-fleet is in the neighborhood of like 70 pounds. So it's a decent amount of food. Um, so yeah, I guess to give you like kind of a non-answer is it very much depends on what's important to you. Um, if it's getting food to people, then almost always. If it's emissions, probably. But obviously, like, is it a question of like risk reward? Are you gonna make a volunteer mad picking up 2 sandwiches to drive across town?
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah, there's a very real possibility of that. And like, if that's the case, good chance that someone who works in that, you know, made to order, whatever your local made to order gas station place is, I bet an employee will take it home. So, not a huge deal if it's not able to be rescued, right? They probably won't actually throw it out.
Yeah, and the one thing that I do like to remind people is that if we want to actually get to zero waste, that does involve smaller rescues because the amount of food that is rescued in small amounts is enormous. I know it's tempting to look at, say, a distributor that has 10,000 pounds of food per pickup and say, well, that's the best bang for the buck. But there's way more than 10,000 pounds of food being wasted in those smaller amounts in your community. And so it's figuring out those logistics that's super critical in getting us to weight zero because it might be 100 rescues to get, or more than 100 rescues. It might be 1,000 rescues to get to that 10,000 pounds of the distributor. It is still making an environmental impact. And it is, those ones that you think are too small are the equivalent of that one pickup. So, obviously you have to weigh your resources, your volunteer resources, your staff resources to make those decisions, as Sean just said, but, it still has an impact.
Yeah. And to do the smaller amounts still tend to be scheduled. Yeah. Especially from like around us, Get-Go is our big MTO place, right? It's made to order. I'm sorry, I'm just like rattling off acronyms that no one actually uses. Um, so they tend to be our smaller ones because they have a pretty sophisticated buying operation, one, but also, you don't want to way over order because you lose money. The margins are not huge, especially in a restaurant setting like that. So they will tend to be a little smaller, and there will be sort of a templated amount of food. Sometimes there's a little more, sometimes there's a little bit less. But yeah, they do schedule the kind of expected donation, and even if it's smaller, even if it's very small compared to the normal, the rescue will still happen. So like I said, 90% of our rescues are scheduled, and most of those come from our very large grocery chain and their subsidiary gas station. So
Yeah. But I will say that it's tempting to think that, one tray of deli sandwiches isn't going to make that big of a difference, and that you'd rather go for the bigger rescue again. But that's part of the reason to have a very, very diverse stable of nonprofits that you work with. For example, this is an old example. This is how long it's been since I've actually been on dispatch, but we used to have an organization in town that it was a drop-in center for homeless youth, street homeless. And they might get 10 people coming in a day for a sandwich, but that was the food that those kids got that day. right? We're talking about kids under 21, 40% or more of them were LGBTQ and had been kicked out of their homes, right? They're looking for food. That tray of deli sandwiches fed all of them. That was lunch for them. So when you think that that small donation may not be that big of a deal, think about what it means to those kids that day. And there's somewhere in your community that serves folks like that, that has that kind of reach, that needs those couple of sandwiches. And it is going to make all the difference in the world to the people who get that. And so don't think that one, like, again, that one tray of sandwiches is not a big deal, because it can be life-changing or life-saving.
And Ricky, to your question, so some best practices for getting drivers to sign up for the smaller ones. Like, since we do it on an app, it's pretty transparent what's on there. Because you can click it, you can see what you're expecting. And in our case, it's sort of letting the type of person who would do that sign up for it. So, and in the case of smaller operations, it can just be kind of knowing your volunteers a little bit. Every org that I've ever worked with in this space does a lot of volunteer outreach. And I know that our volunteer manager knows her volunteers really well. She knows, there's a number of people who probably do more than 80% of our volume. And when I say a number, I can probably give you an exact. It's probably like 20 people do most of our rescues in a day. And they account for a huge amount of it. So they kind of know who they can reach out to with those asks. And obviously when it's posted in a public place, so you put it on your Facebook page, say, hey, small rescue, here's the distance, pick up, drop off, or reach out, just let us know. And then the type of person who will do it, who a surprising number of them do exist, will absolutely reach out to you and get that food to those people.
Tell them why. Tell them why it's important. Tell them where it's going, who it's serving, why, what seems like a small pickup, is a really big deal. Are there any other questions? Oh,
yes.
couple.
Yes. Jen, you probably know the first one a little better than I do.
Yeah. So that takes some work, the composting practices. And it probably depends on the size of your operations and how much compost you have. I think we work with a composting organization to pick up our compost. You could have a compost in your yard, like at your place of business. There's some other things you can do as well. Locally, we have a biodigester organization that will put a biodigester on your property. I believe you have to pay for it, but you can use that as a way to eliminate your food waste ethically and sustainably. So if you're running a food recovery organization, I urge you to do two things. One, have a plan for that type of food. Actually, three things. Two, track it so that you can talk to your donors. If you have a donor that's always giving you garbage, ask them to maybe think about donating it before it becomes garbage. Or figure out other ways that you can work with them to reduce that. And three, so that you can actually do some accurate reporting on the amount of food that's being donated to people and how much is going into alternative waste streams.
To Haven's Harvest, yes, I can't remember if it's everyone or not yet, but yes, yeah, we have features now that are allowing for multiple pickups and drop-offs.
I think that's Unified Rescue Creation, URC. I
Yep.
don't know that
Yeah.
it's launched on the Food Rescue Hero.
Yeah, it's not everywhere yet, but
it's
we're
coming.
getting there. It's coming.
It will be soon. You will be able to string together a bunch of small rescues soon. Great points on the small pickups. Is it possible in the pipeline if we can include these small but important notes directly into the app? Yes. So I think what you're asking is this a note to a volunteer, or is this a note about the nonprofit? If it's a note about the nonprofit, you can put that into the notes about the nonprofit. Right now, the only way that you could communicate that to a volunteer in the app would be in special instructions, which they would not see until they picked it up. Your best bet is to do education through your social media. and maybe highlight some of those, or via your email. You guys do great emails, Vancouver, and to highlight some of the small cases and why they're important.
We are in talks, like there will probably be some type of rescue note eventually. But yeah, special instructions are like the way to do it for now. And obviously, contacting them, you can, our dispatch texts and calls volunteers all the time. Right now, it's kind of the best way to do it. But yeah, we are always game to hear newer and better ways to do it, because we absolutely do take suggestions and incorporate those into the app. So we want it to be something that our customers would use, right?
Well, and Hannah just brought up a really great point about the small rescues. She likes those because she does them on her bike. In the past, we've had folks that solely did rescues on foot or on their bikes. And again, you wanna show that in your marketing so that volunteers know they don't necessarily have to have a car, right? They can look for that small rescue that's near them, that's not going far. Those are the type of things that you want to communicate to your volunteers, either through your email chain, through your social media, however it is, so that they can, know what the best options are for them to volunteer.
Someone, I think he only did it once. We did have a volunteer, just to kind of prove that you can do it, use a bus. That was wild, but the food got delivered. Did great.
Yeah, I love that story. Actually, I didn't know that. And you could, if it were a consistent donation like bagels or something like that, that would be easy to do by bus or by bike. And that too is here when we think about the smaller rescues, the sort of the outlying cases, making our operations more efficient. There are many, many different ways that people do rescues. Their Boulder Food Rescue is all on bikes, for example. And I think making it so that you can highlight and facilitate some of those edge cases or some of those unusual rescues is, again, helping us get to zero waste. And that's the goal, right? Zero waste, zero hunger. We can debate the feasibility of either one of those any day, but you want to get as close to those as possible. To do that, you have to make as much automatic as you can, so that you can put your time and your effort where you can't automate it, where it needs a human's touch, where it needs that sort of like extra help. And I think that Sean's point is that looking at your data and understanding where you can get those efficiencies will help you build operations that will get you where you want to go. All right, so I think we are have no more questions. So thanks everybody for being here today. We dropped the links to register for the conference, to register for our next webinar, and I think to start a food rescue in the chat. If you want to, somebody asked about a demo, you can email me. I'll put my email in there right now. You can email me and we'll get you set up. So thanks everyone. Thank you, Sean, for being here today. I always appreciate
of course. And we mentioned carbon. We mentioned like greenhouse gas a lot. I've gotten kind of a surprising amount of outreach on that before. So like if you also just want to talk more about how that works, you can reach out to either of us. I have set up demos like next week to talk to people about how we do it. So the demo of one of our partners, a board member of one of our partners like asked about it, so I'm talking to them. We're doing this a lot lately, so I'll probably have like a deck made for that specifically. So do feel free to reach out. I am happy to talk about that stuff.
Yep, I've dropped his email into the chat. So it's just Jen@foodrescuehero.org and Sean@foodrescuehero.org.
One of the few organizations that I was the first Sean.
Same. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate all the great questions and interaction today, and have a great rest of your afternoon.